Good afternoon and welcome everyone to an exciting event. Today we're so honored and pleased to be welcoming Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore to give us a reading of her newest book, The Freezer Door. And today's event is entitled Inhabiting a Fluid Life in a Rigid World. And we'll be able to hear a little bit about from the book. Mattilda will be doing a reading for us, and then there'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers. So today's event, and I love working with my colleague, Dr. Red Washburn, because together we come up with ideas and we just go for it. We're like, who do we want to have come speak to our students? And then we're like, let's just do it. And we ask, and we're always happy when it works out. And then the next part that's amazing is that this long list of co-sponsors. And I think that's something that I think we've been able to leverage with COVID, is that we can have these events and share it so much more than just having an event that's located in one space and one time and expect people to come. Now we don't have to displace everyone, and we can record these events and share it and cast a wide net. So I'm so glad that we can have such a long list of collaborators and supporters to hear the great thoughts and perspectives that Mattilda will be bringing with us. My name is Helen Margaret Nasser. I am the director of the Student Union and Intercultural Center and of Student Life at Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm so pleased that we are here today. So with that, the long list of co-sponsors, bear with me, we're gonna give them all snaps and claps. We have the Transdisciplinary Studies Institute, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, Women's and Gender Studies and LGBTQ Studies at Queens College, Women's Center at Brooklyn College, Women's and Gender Studies at Brooklyn College, Women's Studies Quarterly, Center for the Humanities, KCC Women's Center, Women's and Gender Studies Program at KCC, Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Faculty Interest Group at KCC, Safe Zone, the Center for the Study of Women, and the CUNY LGBTQ+ Council. So if your name isn't on that list, come on, we can still add you as a co-sponsor for the next event. What's a couple more? But it's the spirit of this event. We're collaborative. We want to bring great things to our community and spread this important voice. And we're so happy that we'll be able to hear Mattilda's voice today. So again, special thanks to my colleague, Dr. Red Washburn, for the incredibly collaborative spirit that they demonstrate. And with that, I'd like to pass it along to Dr. Red Washburn.
Thank you so much, Helen. I'm so grateful that you're able to make this event work. Always a delight to work with you and co-sponsor events with you in the lead. I want to introduce myself. I'm Red Washburn. I use they, them pronouns. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is really such a gift to have Mattilda with us today. I just wanted to say a couple words about the Women and Gender Studies program at Kingsborough. If you're interested in getting involved in the program has been around 25 plus years, almost 30 at this point. It is a concentration. You take 12 credits. The only required class is Intro to Women and Gender Studies. You could take a number of other classes such as Sociology of Gender, Women in Literature, Women in American History, a number of other classes. If you're interested, feel free to reach out to me or other Women in Gender Studies faculty. It's a really great opportunity to be involved with the program. So this event is just one of many events that we co-sponsor on the campus. I'm really delighted that we have some wonderful colleagues joining us today. Dr. J.V. Fuqua, the Director of Women and Gender Studies at Queens College, and J.C. Carlson at the LGBTQI plus Program Coordinator at Queens College and the Associate Director of the CUNY LGBTQI plus Consortium. And they both will be giving introductory remarks. So I'll read their bios, and then I just wanted to say a couple of words about Mattilda's work. Then I was just going to share just a very small piece of an interview that I did with her recently that'll appear in Sinister Wisdom's Trans Feminism issue. And I'm so grateful for your contributions, Mattilda. This event is called Inhabiting a Fluid Life in a Rigid World, a discussion with Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore, and she will be reading from The Freezer Door. There will be ample time for Q&A, and JC and Helen will be facilitating that. So let me go ahead and introduce the introductory speakers. So the first person is JC Carlson. They're the LGBTQI plus programs coordinator at Queens College and the associate director of the CUNY LGBTQI plus consortium. They serve on the CUNY LGBTQI plus Directors Council as a member of the CUNY Safe Zone Trainings and LGBTQ Resource Centers Committee and the Gender Name Policies and Information Systems Committee. This work is so important. Thank you, JC. They're also the advisor to the Gender, Love, and Sexuality Alliance, which is the student LGBTQI plus club on the Queens College campus. And Dr. J.V. Fuqua is an associate professor of media studies and the director of Women and Gender Studies program and the interim director of the MA program in media studies at Queens College. Their teaching and research interests include queer theory, cultural studies, media history, theory, and environmental cultural studies. Their monograph, Prescription TV, Therapeutic Discourse in the Hospital and at Home, was published in 2012 by Duke University Press. A current work in progress includes a multimedia piece on fly fishing, gender fluidity, and the queerness of the natural world. And JV, I'm very much looking forward to that. So I don't want to take up too much space, but I will share just a quick excerpt from this interview that Mattilda and I did, and I'm so grateful for your time and energy, Mattilda. And this is just a shameless plug to be on the lookout for the full interview, which is wonderful. Hopefully that'll be out next year. So I asked Mattilda a little bit about her perspectives around trans and queer lives and the connections between bodies in queer, trans, feminist spaces. And her response was, feminism is the politic that first spoke to me as a way to challenge power, demand accountability, reject hierarchies, and further gender, sexual, social, and political self-determination for everyone. To me, that's the dream of feminism, which is the dream of being queer. To me, they're intertwined. Queer is my embodied practice of staying alive. But as I write in the Freeze Your Door, the first time I ever went into a space that called itself feminist, the conversation was about whether men could identify as feminists. And I knew that I would never be a man, but I also knew that the question was about me and about whether my body could exist in a space that really wasn't designed for bodies like mine. But somehow I knew at the age of 18 that feminism was a politic and not a particular type of body, and that it was what I needed in order to survive. So that's just a wonderful excerpt from this, this interview. And Mattilda has so much work, and we're going to hear more about her. So I'm going to turn it over to JC and JV to do the introductory remarks. Thank you so much.
Okay, I guess I'll begin. Hi, JC Carlson here from Queens College, and thank you, Red. Thank you, Red, for asking me to be here today. And it is an honor to be here. And it's great to be here with my friend JV Fuqua. And of course, Mattilda, I've been looking forward to meeting you and hearing you discuss your book, The Freeze Your Door, with us and sharing with us your writing processes and the specific way you formatted this book. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. And first, I'd like to just say that I connected with this book, and immediately I thought that my connection was to a memoir that began with references to the 1990s and the AIDS pandemic, you know, and then because that was the very time that I began coming out. And then I thought, okay, here I go again, searching for something, a connection to the past and perhaps, you know, but then I read a line that you wrote and I latched onto it, Mattilda. You wrote, the opposite of nostalgia is truth. And right then this book was promising to be more than a bittersweet stroll down memory lane for me and me pining for a past that I had somehow incorrectly memorialized or chose to remember differently than it was. And I understood the relationship between the ice cube and the ice cube tray that you so cleverly created for us. I mean, your book reminded me of the times when I experienced the hypocrisy of the very community that I had thought would embrace me and didn't. And you bravely confront this hypocrisy head on, Mattilda. You know, and you do that when you talk about, like Red said, those oppositional queer spaces and those hierarchies. So the metaphor of the ice cube and the ice cube tray is brilliant. And yeah, it's about desire and relationship and what lies beyond and gentrification and so much more. And gentrification as a topic in the book was interesting. Yeah, to walk down old streets in New York City and see a Starbucks pop up where a gay bar once was, or more recently, I was in the meatpacking district, and there was this upscale restaurant that was built on top of the hole in the ground where a dark, dank stairway used to lead down into a sex club. It upset me. It was this erasure of what I perceived to be queer culture. And this book reminds me that these spaces weren't always what I wanted them to be or needed them to be, or even what I remembered them to be. And another point in the book is that the search for connection, brings us to the places our younger selves would have never imagined. And they're the same places that our current selves, we don't openly discuss. But Mattilda, you openly discuss sex in your book, and thank you. There was a lot of freedom in reading and identifying with what you wrote. As a person who advises queer students at Queens College and carves out physical and now virtual safe spaces for them, I see their isolation sometimes, even more than I can ever see my own isolation. And, the book, yeah, sure, it spoke to me. I said that, but it definitely speaks to young people too. They can relate to the feelings of longing in both the physical spaces and those virtual spaces that they inhabit. They long for connection in this pandemic. It's always queers and plagues, right? We have that history together, that symbiotic relationship. But even pre-pandemic, I would listen to many of them struggling to belong. Yet they search, like we searched. So, this book is one for all of us in the queer community, young, old, and in between. And for that reason, I added The Freezer Door to the list of books to purchase for the Queer Collection. And it's a collection of LGBTQI plus titles at the Benjamin S. Rosenthal Library at Queens College. And why? I've added memoirs of all kinds to that collection. But why? Because this book is different in many ways. One of those ways is the stream of consciousness format that you use throughout the book that would sometimes include a single thought on top of the page and leave the rest of the page blank, allowing me space to consider what was written and come together with my own thoughts and feelings. I appreciated that, and we all need space for that. And this book provides it. So the Freezer Door, it's thought-provoking, it's clever, it's funny, it's honest, it's unapologetic, and I loved it. So I'm pretty sure my time is up, way up. Thank you again, Red. And now I'd like to turn it over to my good friend, JV Fuqua.
Hey, that was wonderful, JC. And hi, everybody. I'm JV Fuqua, and I'm the director of the Women and Gender Studies program at Queens College. And I just thank quickly Red and Helen and JC and everyone who's already been mentioned, including our wonderful faculty, staff, and students who are in attendance today. Special shout out to my students in mediating masculinity. And so we're so excited to have Mattilda here with us. And I would just like to read briefly her bio and then say just a couple of quick words about non-binariness. Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore is the author, most recently, of The Freezer Door, a New York Times Editor's Choice, one of Oprah Magazine's best LGBTQ books of 2020, and a finalist for the PEN Jean Stein Book Award. Her previous nonfiction title, The End of San Francisco, won a Lambda Literary Award, and her novel Sketch to See, which I absolutely want to read, put it on my list, was one of NPR's best books of 2018. Sycamore is the author of 2 nonfiction titles and 3 novels, as well as the editor of 6 nonfiction anthologies. Her new anthology, Between Certain Death and a Possible Future, Queer Writing on Growing Up with the AIDS Crisis, has just been released. Her next book, Touching The art will be published by Soft Skull Press in 2023, and she lives in Seattle. We're so happy to have you here. I would just like to point out, over my shoulder here, you see a painting, and I found it in a thrift store when I was in graduate school in Pittsburgh. And it is, on the back, it says San Francisco. And it's so of course I had to have it. It was $1. And I've been listening most recently to some interviews that Mattilda has given, most notably on the end of San Francisco. And that work has really struck me in lots of ways. I went to San Francisco for the first time in 1983, and as a really young pup, and watched the city change, as you note, Mattilda, over quite a very short time. There's so much about what you said, the quotation about with the interview that read about feminist politics not being anchored in a body, but in a practice, and also in space, I think, and what happens. And so I've been thinking a lot about San Francisco, the past, the current state of things, and queerness. And also, strangely enough, in the I know that David Wojnarowicz is a big touchstone for you, and Rebecca Brown, and I was so floored when I heard you speaking of both of their works. So there's more I could say, but I've got a house full of workmen, and I am really not wanting to hear myself talk anymore. I'd like to hear you. So without further ado, we'll present Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore.
Oh, thank you everyone for those incredible introductions. I mean, I wasn't expecting such deep engagement with my work. It's very rare to experience that right at the beginning of an event. So I want to thank you all for, for such eloquence and for such deep, critical, embodied, eloquent engagement. Yeah, and I can't wait to hear what questions people have. I also want to encourage people, feel free to light up the chat at any moment. It's nice to know people are here. Thank you, Red, for the invitation. And thank you everyone else for making this event happen and for making it so beautiful already. Like I said, it's rare to feel that intimacy, especially in these virtual spaces, right? So thank you for bringing all of that. Yeah, and feel free, anyone, if you have questions at any point, just throw them down and I'll be happy to respond. So I'm going to read a little bit from the freezer door. Red actually foreshadowed the excerpt I'm reading, but that was only unintentional. So yeah, I'm reading from about a quarter of the way through the book. Here we go. When you turn the music off and suddenly you feel an unbearable sadness, that means turn the music back on, right? When you still feel the sadness, even with the music, that means there's something wrong with this music. Sometimes I feel like sex without context isn't sex at all. And sometimes I feel like sex without context is what sex should always be. When you write something broken, is it important to feel broken? When you write something unbroken, is it important? Even just sitting next to someone who casually puts his hand on my leg, this means so much to me. Yes, he has a boyfriend who's sitting right next to us. And this is okay too. What I'm saying is that I want my body back, my whole body, my whole experience of the world. I've spent so much time trying to find the places and spaces where I can interact without feeling broken. But this hasn't worked. I can no longer live in queer worlds where I'm intellectually and emotionally present, but I don't have an embodied self. Sometimes when you don't write about something, it goes away. And sometimes when you don't write about something, it never goes away. This guy on the radio says he writes in a sense of elation in the morning. A sense of elation for several hours every day, very early. Maybe I misheard him. He said getting directions, but I thought he said getting erections. When I was a kid, I made up happy lyrics for sad songs. This is called denial. One thing about language is that sometimes it hurts or it doesn't hurt, and then you do. Acknowledging inconsistency doesn't have to mean embracing it, or shouldn't, I don't think, but most people don't seem to realize this. The desire to sound reasonable, and the only way to say something meaningful is to sound unreasonable. My mother says that whenever she doesn't hear back from me for a few days, she feels like that time when I went missing for 24 or 48 hours, and then I appeared in the driveway and she took me to Suburban Hospital to see if I'd had a concussion. I don't remember this at all. I do remember that every weekend in high school, I would leave after screaming fights with my father, who didn't want to pay for a cab or books or a restaurant or whatever it was I wanted. He just wanted to scream. I would leave for as long as I could. But my mother doesn't remember my father screaming at me. She remembers my father screaming at her. By the end of high school, I stayed at my father's office every weekend, even when I didn't have anything to do. It was a studio apartment where he'd added a wall to create a waiting room for his patients, with copies of Time and New York Magazine instead of the New Yorker, like the other psychiatrists. I'd always wanted to live in an apartment. When I stayed at my father's office, I could almost pretend I had my own place, with a bathroom in 2 parts and the tiniest kitchen. I would study the way my father's pens were arranged and the exact placement of every tissue box. But my friends weren't as careful. It wasn't as easy to conceal a cigarette burn in the carpet as it was to move the tissue box back. So that's when my father found out. But then I said, "Do you really want me driving home drunk?" That was my argument. The argument that worked. I needed to beat my father on his terms because those were the only terms. When someone at a bar compliments my outfit and then says he used to be more daring, but then he got older, I'm guessing he thinks I'm a lot younger than he is. But then he says he went home for the holidays and found this 9 Inch Nails t-shirt from when he was in 6th grade. And he must have worn it for gym class because it still really smelled. And if he was in 6th grade when he had a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt, that means he's at least 4 years younger than me.